So let's begin. Let's talk about what every designer and workroom or that are selling decorative hardware need to know. You know, selling decorative hardware, drapery hardware, which is that sort of mounting system, if you will, the supporting players of all your custom soft treatments, is somewhat of a balancing act. There are certain things that the client expects from drapery hardware as part of the custom design process, and then there are certain things that the designer has to consider when specifying drapery hardware. So the client is asking us for, probably in lots of cases, the world, you know, privacy and light control, and I want my view, but I only want my view at certain times of the day, and I need it to be energy efficient or blackout for sleeping, but of course I want to have the latest and greatest because I want a fashionable look, and I want this all done within my budget. So there's a lot for us as a designer to consider, whether it's the space limitations, whether the fabrics that we're choosing are appropriate for the drapery hardware. Are there hardware limitations? Installation challenges that are going to make us have to devise custom bracketing, for example, or specialty rods and bending and bows. And then again, also always within her budget. You know, most of the times the designer is purchasing the drapery hardware and is making note of it on the installation order or on the workroom order. But there's a couple of things for those of you that might be new to moving into soft, or you've been using your workroom to purchase all the drapery hardware from and want to start opening your own accounts and start specifying drapery hardware on your own. Is one of the first things I would suggest is to start, you know, collecting catalogs from all the hardware manufacturers that are out there, because they are invaluable information and reference guides on sizes and clearances and projections and finishes, because there really is no universal sizing standard that we follow with drapery hardware. One of the things that I've been done in the past is, you know, typically you get an extra bracket or you order an extra ring or whatever it might be. I start saving those and put those on key rings, so that I have, specifically with rings, so that I have ring sizes from every manufacturer that I'm working with, because every inside and outside dimension can vary. But typically with this balance act, I want to say that probably the general rule is, as custom window fashion designers, is that when you start selecting drapery hardware, it's all about choosing the very best drapery hardware that your client can afford. So let's talk about some terminology first of all, so that we're all on the same plane. That's one thing that's always I find interesting within the window fashion realm. There's lots of different terms for things as we move across the country in different regions. So there are white goods. Sometimes they're called basic hardware. These are basically your curtain rods, your Travis rods, your standard white Travis rods, brackets, your basic brackets and supports, cut to measure and architectural track. Some of those fall into that. We're probably selling more architectural tracks and cut to measure tracks now with the popularity of ripple folds growing. And then there are decorative Travis rods. There are wooden resin poles and finials. There's the iron and metal rods that are out there. There's all kinds of different brackets, both decorative and functional. Your hooks and your rings, your accessories, and decorative cafe sets. Projection and clearance. So projection is the distance from the wall to the face of the bracket. And it usually comes into play when you're working in more than one layer, doing combinations, or doing blind and then a drapery, or drapery and a top treatment. Rod clearance, which is the measurement A here, is basically the distance from the back of your rod, so the back of your stirrup, to the wall. Larger the rod, smaller the clearance. And you want to know what that rod clearance is, particularly when you're working with a custom bracket. Now how you can find that out is you can actually look in a catalog, find out what size rod you're using, deduct 1/2 of the rod diameter from your return, and you'll get your clearance. Now a return is a fabric measurement, and typically it's the measure from the wall to the center of the eye, and then you add a 1/2 inch so that you have enough ease in your fabric so that it wraps to the wall. So you need to know first off where you're falling with rod clearances and projections and returns as you start working in your system. The other thing is blind clearance. We typically recommend that if you're putting a blind onto the between your decorative treatment and your decorative rod, that you want to have at least 1.5 inches of clearance. So as you can see, that can eat up a lot of space, and what you thought was going to work with a 3.5 inch projection on your rod, all of a sudden it probably needs to be more like 5.5 or 6. Returns. Returns are, again, that fabric measurement that wraps around and hides your rod projection, and whether you're working in decorative rods or white goods, every treatment should have a return on it. The pleat never ends on the edge of the fabric. Your overlaps are on your leading edge, and that's the distance from the last pleat to the edge of the drapery panel. Here are some rod drapery return formulas, and I know this is pretty basic stuff, but what's interesting is, especially for those of you that maybe have just been in the business for 5 or 6 years, is we do a lot of drapery panels that are stationary, but we're really now starting to see where we're moving back into the traditional, functional, double, triple layered functioning drapery panel, shears with over draperies, or blinds and shears and over draperies. So you really do need to keep your return formulas and your overlaps and your rod projections in mind when you start working with that. The other thing that working in the functioning realm and working with both with decorative and drapery hardware is figuring stack back. Stack back's the area that completely clears the glass, and there is no magic number when you're figuring stack back. It always varies by your fabric weight, by the type of pleat. For example, a goblet pleat takes up more stack than a Euro pleat would, or an inverted pleat takes up more than a pinch pleat. Also, if you're lining and interlining the treatment, it takes more. Your hardware, what's the size of your ring? You know, if you're using a wooden pole with a wooden ring, that stack back will increase versus an iron pole with an iron ring. And then even the kind of tension you have on it with the tension pulleys, and now with all the cord safety that scenarios that are happening out there, things are pulling harder, so they're not stacking back as far. There's different types of stacks, sides, and splits, and what you'll want to keep in mind is when you figure your stack back is always a whole number that you need to divide by 2 if you're looking for a stack back on each side or for pairs of draperies. Now there's 4 or 5 formulas to use. Typically most people take the rod face width and they divide it. So if I had a rod face that was going to be 68 inches and divided it by 3, I'd get 22 or 11 inches on each side. Where I would use this is where I already know, let's say I have limited space and I already know that my bracket to bracket or my rod face width can only be that 68 inches. Maybe I have a wall or something that's in the way. The other way you can figure is take your glass opening, add 12 inches and then divide it by 6, and in this formula you'd find that you needed 9.5 inches on each side. So then you would take your window opening, your 12 inches, and maybe add 9.5 inches to that rod measure. You're using this formula when you have more where you have an unlimited space and you're trying to figure out what your bracket to bracket should be. Another way is to take that window measurement times a width and a half, or times 1.5, excuse me, which will give you a bracket to bracket, or again your rod width. How I learned it from my installer, and just kind of run through, because I can once you do this a couple of times, you can actually do it in your head and pretty well be able to tell the client where things are going to stack back, is figure out the number of widths that you're going to need. And if you know that your workroom, typically, for example, my workroom uses 5 pleats per width on a 54-inch goods fabrics. I know Lafayette has 6 pleats, but if you know how many pleats per width your workroom has in their standards, then take the number of widths that you're doing in the treatment times the number of pleats per width, figure 1 inch per pleat, and then add your 3.5 inches for your overlaps and returns. And when you work that formula out, you'll see that if I had a 3-width drapery times 5-inch, pleats, or 5 inches in each width, that's 15, and I would add my overlaps and returns, which is 7 inches. I'd get 22 inches, or my stack back would be 11 inches on each side. One tip I'll make here, learning the hard way is, if you're doing motorization and you're wanting to figure stack back on motorization, and by the way, this also holds true with returns and overlaps on motorization, whether you need stack back or not, is that you need to increase your overlap size and your return size so that they wrap around the motor on one side and they fit the master carrier properly. Now here's a stack back tip for you. You can do this with white goods. Most decorative hardware will actually fall below the Travis rod, but here's your white Travis rod, and typically, as you know, the drapery treatment, it falls in front and covers the rod. What you can do is shorten the finished length, and so when you pin it up, the drapery panel falls below the rod. What this will do is give you a tighter stack. And by the way, if you're dealing with multiple widths and let's say an older client, it will also pull better. Rings. Lots of different rings, as I said before. You need to know those inner and outer dimensions on rings, and you need to know that by manufacturer. That's where your catalogs definitely come into play. And what we use a lot of are C-rings, because C-rings definitely allow you to bypass that center support, and I'll talk more about those later as we get into custom. Ring number, you know, for example, as I said, my workroom at 2.5 to 1 fullness has 5 pleats per width. Those kinds of workroom allowances you should have in your head as a designer, so you know how many rings you're having to order, how many pleats are going to be on the treatment, etc. The other thing you need to know when you're working with drapery hardware and draperies and our top treatments that will be pinned is what a pin setting is. So your pin setting is the difference between the distance between the top of your pleat and the top of the pin. And I actually have a chart that kind of gives you an example. So if you're doing, wood poles or cafe rings or rods or whatever, usually it's a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, and so that the top of the panel covers the eye, but moves easily. 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches on a standard rod, and if you're doing carriers on curtain rodding, it's a 3-inch drop. You also want to know what kind of pins you're going to be specifying if your workroom is pinning for you or if you're purchasing pins. There's rounded pins, there's pointed pins, there's heavy duty, there's regular duty. One thing that we fail to think about a lot of times is the weight of the drapery, and if it's going to function properly on the decorative rod that we chose. And part of that issue comes in not specifying or using the correct pins. Other thing to be aware of are splicing, whether it's because of shipping constraints or design intent for center pieces. You probably will have splicing, whether it's on wood poles or on iron. Now there's one thing called a clip splice, which is like a pressure fitting, and it fits over or onto the rod and where the two rods meet. A splice, or using a connector screw, is typically done in wood, and you're going to cut it and then use a connector screw to screw the two pieces together. A tube splice is an inner outer, and you typically have those only with iron, and this is definitely a much stronger splice. But rule of thumb, wherever you have a splice, you're going to want to have a support bracket. So when you're planning your decorative hardware and you need 9.5 feet, and you ordered a 4-foot pole and a 8-foot pole because you're splicing it together, whether it's iron or wood, you don't want that to fall over, 1.5 feet in from one side, because you would have taken the 8 feet and then cut the 1.5 feet off of the other pole or rod. So you need to do some planning. Where do you want that bracket to fit? Where do you want that splice to go? Maybe you'll end up having 2 splices, and they'll fall kind of behind a stationary panel where you can put a bracket and hide a bracket. Those things all need to be taken into consideration before you even order your hardware. So talking about ordering hardware and the considerations with hardware mounting systems is, did you consider, first of all, the window itself? There are many different kinds of combinations of windows. It's not just about measuring the window, but it's about understanding what the measurements that you've taken mean and how they all fall together and fall into place. The second thing you have to take into consideration is the space around the window. Can you get a finial up at the ceiling? Is there enough wall space between the edge of the window and the corner? Is there only 1 inch of flat wall space that you can mount a support bracket on? Do I have to have a center support custom made so that the back is only 1 inch? All those kinds of things to be considered. And then third is obviously the room that you're working in, because does the drapery hardware work with not only with the window treatment, but does it work with the room? Is it too over the top? Are you looking at contemporary rods that are done in a French country dining room? All those things need to be taken into consideration, as well as the stationary, the type of treatment that you're working with. Part of that type of treatment is not only knowing the style, but also knowing the weight of the treatment and whether or not it's going to be stationary and functioning. The width and the lengths. How many layers are you going to have? Because that's going to depend on your projections and clearances. Do you need to figure a stack? Because she is all about the view. And where are you going to mount it? And then and only then, once you have all those answers, can you decide whether or not you've made the right choice in a mounting system or your decorative hardware. So let's talk a bit more about terminology when it comes to all these considerations. Rod face is the measurement from one end of the rod to the other, or base of finial to base of finial. When you order a rod and talk about rod face, it does not include the finial measurements. Sometimes it's called bracket to bracket. There's also something called a bracket-to-bracket maximum, and the maximum is the point where the rod is going to bow or sag without a center support. And a lot of times your hardware manufacturers will note that based on the size of the rod and the material of the rod in your catalogs. So for example, 72 inches on a wood pole on a one-way draw is the bracket-to-bracket maximum. What that means is you can only do a one-way draw without a center support up to 72 inches. And now that affects, again, your treatment style, whether or not it's going to be stationary or functioning, etc., etc. Now, if it was a pair, you could do 144 because, again, it would be doubling that on a pair with the center support in the center. There's a couple of different places that you can mount your drapery hardware. Standard is typically your frame-to-frame measurement, and then 8 inches or 4 inches on each side off the window, and this gives you better visibility. Mounting on the frame which is the exact width measurement, is a poor choice. It's never really done in custom, and that's one of the differentiations that when you're selling drapery hardware, you're going to mention that to your client, that they're not going to mount it on the frame, particularly if they've been buying from retailers or ready-made hardware before. They're typically mounting on the frame, and they need to be educated about that. Wall-to-wall is a corner-to-corner measurement, and you deduct 2 inches so you can and add your overlaps and returns. The deduction allows you to get a bracket in there and wrap around. You might need to deduct a bit more based on the end caps that you're choosing from the manufacturer. And then your stacking or your stack back clears your glass and your view. Finish length measurements are typically the top of the rod to your desired length, and then you need to minus a ring allowance when you're talking decorative hardware. Your ring allowance is from the top of the rod to the center of the eye. And again, that's why I collect rings, because that ring allowance can change. And even within manufacture, I mean, you could put use a 1-inch pole, and you could put an 1.25 inch inside diameter ring if you wanted something to be tight and fit tightly onto it, or you could do a large 2.25 inch diameter ring if that was the intent that you wanted. Then you need to consider your mounting height options. You know, is it inside? Is it outside? Is it up above the window? Are you at the ceiling? Are you layering mounting heights and doing things differently? You know, and what's interesting is a lot of times these are all these decisions that are you're making in your head and making notes as you're doing a walkthrough through the client's house before you've even taken your measurements. So you're really designing before, you know, everyone always says measuring is the first step, but for a lot of us it's maybe step 3 or 4. Typically though, when you are mounting decorative hardware, you want to mount 4 to 8 inches up from the frame, because you've got a leg on most of your brackets, and typically that leg is approximately 2 inches minimum. The other thing you always want to make sure is, do you have room for your rod and your finials if you're working at the ceiling? Because height does reign supreme, and you want to try to start at the ceiling and work your way down. For example, on this picture, because of this ring and it's up almost 4 inches from this rod, she had to come down onto the ceiling height. And here's a great example too of layering mounting heights, something that we're starting to do more and more of. There's no rule that says you would have had to mount those shears across here. See, these were inside mount shears, and then they brought the panels up off onto the interior wall. This definitely needed decorative hardware. A medallion, a short rod, a long rod. It just kind of looks like it's falling into place or floating into place. This is a great picture to show clients when you're trying to sell the merits of finishing off with drapery hardware. So the idea is to start at the ceiling and work down as much as possible when you can in choosing your decorative hardware, and not mount onto the frame. And here you've got lots of things happening. Again, different varying mounting heights. You've got some trim showing on the window. You've got a top treatment. Again, almost looks like there's no decorative hardware here. It looks kind of almost unfinished when you have this elaborate cornice next to it. All of that needed to be taken into consideration in designing the treatments. And this piece of decorative hardware, I love the idea of it wrapping around the room. Kind of weird that it falls through the arch though, wouldn't you agree? I think better choice for me would have been to end this rod here with a decorative finial, go across to the other side and start it again. That just is not acceptable to go through the window. When you're deciding where you're mounting your decorative hardware, you're going to want to talk about, you know, mounting at the highest height. I think what happened here is you've got a door on the left and a window on the right, and the tops of those are not even, and the same distance down from the crown. And probably the install order said mount the drapery rods 4 inches or 6 inches above the top of the trim. The installer went in there and did exactly what you asked. This is 6 inches above this window, as is the 6 inches above the door, but they're not at the same height. So you want to make sure when you're specifying decorative hardware that you minimize sight lines and that the rods are at the same heights as much as possible. So all these decisions when you're working with drapery hardware, it's like, how much area do you want to cover? If it's functioning, which way is it going to draw? Where do I need to mount it? And then how many layers do I really have from all of that? Then after those decisions are made, it's really about measuring. For those of us that work in the soft realm of window fashions, these are our most important measurements. And maybe the width of the window, number 3, but these measurements are much more important to the hard guys when they're taking their measurements. We need to know floor to ceiling, trim to floor, distance between the top of the trim and the ceiling, maybe even from the sill to the floor. These Baker dozen, if you will, and on the side and what's happening in the space around the window is just as important as what the window measurement is. Again, very basic. We all know this. Measure every window. They're never always the same. Measure sequentially. Measure width first and length second. Use forms. Use a steel tape, never a cloth tape. Make sure that all your details are spelled out and that you might know them. They might be in your head, but make sure that everybody on your team knows it. The drapery hardware manufacturer, the workroom, etc. A lot of times finishes are missed. You know, again, it's in our head. We know what finish we chose, and we just fail to put those things on work orders. Bracket to brackets, or base of finial to base of finial, so that the manufacturers especially custom manufacturers, are making it correctly. What your return sizes are for your projections. There are lots of forms out there. Minutes Matter, I think, has one of the better forms, but the idea is to standardize your measuring process by using some sort of form. When you're measuring corners, and by the way, corner windows are becoming more popular because builders are starting to go back to these, you know, corner windows because they give more view, and versus putting in the price of a large big window. But they're a difficult treatment to balance and to choose hardware for. So you need to measure the window separately to see if there's any issues, and then make the client aware that, you know, maybe a functioning treatment isn't going to work because things are going to interfere with each other. The more you project into the room, the smaller the treatment gets, and if you keep continuing projecting into the room, all of a sudden the end of the treatment might be in on the window, in here and in here. So you need to sometimes draw it out for intent, and then decide if you are going to butt or you're going to bypass. And when you're working with decorative hardware, create that point of emphasis. Here it was done with medallions, and if you notice, the medallion really created that point of emphasis because one's at the ceiling and the other isn't. Plus, this was probably even more difficult because this is all tiled. At least in the corner, they have a grout line that they could have come in. Here's a tip when you're using medallions in angled configurations like corners and bays, is have your installer cut a block so that the 45 or the 90-degree block angle goes into the corner, and then it's flat on the face, and then you can screw your medallion into it and it doesn't kick to the one side or the other. Measuring bays, we're all familiar with how important it is. Again, check with your manufacturer. Each manufacturer does it a bit differently and requires a bit different information. Some decorative hardware manufacturers allow you to just give the wall measurements and the angles, and then they will figure out what the actual rod sizes are that you need. The other thing in figuring bays is you're also going to need to know what kind of specialty hardware you're going to use in these corners so that you can get the measures correctly. So when you are measuring that bay, was it a wall measure or did you do it on the floor and use the card trick? You know, is there baseboard that that sticks out 5/8 to an inch that you maybe didn't get a real accurate measure. The other thing is predetermine where you're placing all your brackets and your finials, and make sure you have enough clearance and enough room. Especially if you're mitering or splicing, you're going to have 2 brackets in that corner. And again, if you had a 6-inch projection on a decorative hardware, you might find that that's just not going to visually work for you in your bay window. Some tools and hardware that I like to use to get those angles, which are so critical, correct, is Roley's dustboard hinge plate, because it gives me a protractor. You can use just a regular protractor from an office supply house. Sometimes you can use this dustboard hinge plate if you're using mixing combinations. Or these corner pieces, you can do an adjustable corner. Some people make a stationary corner. I like the adjustable corner because once it gives me more flexibility on the job site. The other thing is, as I said, remember your corner bracket like this, and here's that tube splice, can take up precious stack space. So again, if she's all about view and wants everything to fall off the window, and she's got to deal with an angle in a bay window, sometimes something has to be compromised. Maybe you're doing a custom bend, which then allows you at the radius just to spread out the brackets. Here's that angled, here's a fixed. I actually, from Orion, I love this piece. This is a corner piece and it's got a hinge on it. So again, it allows you to adjust, and you can also adjust the projection on it. It really is a nice piece. But no matter what kind of corner, bow, bay, window you're using, is when you're ordering those brackets, here these are specially made ceiling brackets, and I get that they probably were painted off white because the designer was thinking crown. I think it would have been better, and they wouldn't have been so noticeable if they actually were the wood tone, or they were painted or something differently to almost go away. They really stick out as off-white on that. Again, specialty window, but a rod that just comes across and cuts it. This is where your custom drapery hardware person, like an Orion, can come in here and you can give them this template measure, and they could have bent this rod and straightened it and bent this rod, and then it would have made all the difference, I think, in that room. So types of hardware. When you're talking decorative hardware, there's ready-made hardware. It's your stuff that you're buying that's pre-packaged, sold at retailers. It's got a telescoping rod. It can't be bent or bowed. This is what is your most economical choice. Sometimes you have to go with it. But again, the issue here is that telescoping rod and putting a custom drapery panel that's lined, and in some cases lined and interlined, on a aluminum pole that's been powder coated. Just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. Decorative curtain rods are things like cafe curtains with cafe clips in your brackets. You can do an inside mount, or you can do an outside mount. Drapery cranes. A lot of these items are ready-made, again, and pre-packaged, or you can also purchase them custom. The one thing about drapery cranes to always keep in mind, they're really great and functioning idea for doors, but there's only, again, a certain amount of weight and a certain amount of width that you can make these without them wanting to bend or pull out of the walls. Cafe, here's some cafe sets with hand-drawn batons that Orion did for me. Here's drapery cranes on this door, and as you can see, it looks like it's only 1, 2, 3, maybe a width and a half at the very most across that probably 72-inch door. Then there's semi-custom, which is basically sold in predetermined lengths. That's your 4-foot, 6-foot, 12-foot poles. You know, Kirsch wood trends, Kirsch metal trends is semi-custom. It's typically pre-packaged. Your finials are sold separately. Sometimes your rings are, but also your rings can be packaged in, you know, what are they, 7? And then you end up with, you know, additional leftover waste when you're working in semi-custom. And the other thing is sometimes the accessory pieces are limited when you're doing specialty hardware or accessories. So decorative rods, that are semi-custom are traditionally the old school, C-ring with carriers below, finial that is attached that's plastic, metal fascia, etc. Your rod width again, bracket to bracket is base of finial to base of finial. And the slide carriers and the slide gate are on there, cord tension pulleyers. For Orion, their express line is considered their semi-custom line. In iron, it comes in 1.5 inch rod sizes, and basically it's limited to 8 finials and 6 finishes, and it ships express. Again, it's a semi-custom option and a value price point. As you can see, not as many accessories. Only a certain mounting bracket that you can use with it, or their Italian line, which if you're looking for something that's more contemporary, it only comes in the nickel and the chrome. And again, not as many. It's the stirrup bracket and an end cap and 1 ring size. Cut to measure track, is typically economical. A lot of people are starting to use this because of ripple folds. It's typically sold in bulk in 16-foot lengths. It can be bent. You can buy them as sets from your distributors, and you do have accessories, and you can flip out carriers and put in ball bearing carriers, etc. It's always, this custom cut tracks are always great when you're working in heavier draperies. And as I said, a variation is your ripple fold. And what's really exciting from many manufacturers, including Orion, you might not even know this. I have to be honest, I didn't know this until a little while ago, is they do decorative hardware that you can have ripple fold carriers on. So best of both worlds. You don't have that white track that's exposed, yet you can sell that contemporary ripple fold. And then there's truly custom hardware. And again, this is a great way to sell to your clients. It's like, good, better, best, ready-made, semi-custom, custom. You can go through this kind of information with her and then give her all the reasons why, custom is not only going to solve her challenges within her window fashion project, but give her the look that she's looking for. There's no waste because it's just made for that window. You aren't having extra rings or whatever. It's easier to install because it's been, again, as a custom product, it's been thought out. You know exactly where that bracket gets mounted in. If it's an arch treatment like this, and these rings are welded on, I've already told them where to weld those rings. It's just easy peasy in a lot of cases. There's less chance for error. And again, as I said, it's sold a la carte. It's 1 ring. It's 1 bracket. It's 1 rod cut to the bracket-to-back bracket you provided or the template. And it's always finished on the job, so you don't have a dye lot issue or a stain issue coming in when you're buying prepackaged kind of scenarios. There's custom wood. There's lots of different finials, resin, wood and resin mixes, different size poles. You can do reeded poles, twisted poles, smooth poles, stains, paint finishes. For Orion, customization is certainly their forte and their specialty. And in wood, for example, they have 30 different finials and about 45 different finishes. You can get a lot of accessories, whether it's a baton for hand-drawn, your socketing, your center supports. Here's a swivel corner. Here's a cup bracket. Sometimes this is called a European bracket versus this flat wooden bracket. Personally, I have to be honest with you, do not like these brackets. These are very difficult to mount. You can do French poles as wood, with wood with elbow returns. Then metal. Again, French poles seem to be very, particularly with stationary panels these days. This is definitely one of the better selling treatments amongst all drapery manufacturers. You can do all kinds of different iron finishes, highlighting, different metals, end caps, different size, whether it's hollow, square, twisted, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, you know, there's loads of varieties. And then when it comes to finials, like this happens to be the Provence collection, you can get these beautiful hand-blown glass, and then they also have my favorites, the crystals in all the different crystal shapes. And then these, by the way, this happens to be new metal finishes, which is really moving into where the warm metallics are trending on window treatments. You know, it used to be bronze, or old bronze and brushed nickel and chrome, now moving into in some cases black nickel, but certainly brass and this rose gold and copper. You can see the looks. These warmer metallics, very key and on trend for window treatments. You can do traversing custom, left, right, and center. Again, very similar structure to all traversing decorative rods. You've got your C-ring, your master carriers, your brackets, whether you choose a finial or an end cap. You've got the mounting bracket, which actually hooks in underneath in the channel so that the rings slide over the top of the bracket. And then, of course, your child safety compliant tensioning device. Again, for both pinch pleat and ripple fold as a decorative rod traversing. Here's a single traversing rod. And these are doubles. You can bend traversing, you can curve them, which is another great option of doing custom traversing rods versus semi-custom. And then the other thing here's another tip, we call them dead panels when you're doing decorative traversing rods. So if you're doing one-way draws on a door, for example, or a configuration of a window on either side of the fireplace. And, you know, when you do that, even if it's a decorative rod, it just kind of feels like it's unfinished because obviously here it's actually even been strung incorrectly, as you can see. But it just always feels unfinished because it kind of just is there. So you can create a dead panel so that it balances out and it looks like it's a pair of draperies. And how you do that is you would order a decorative traversing rod that is a one-way draw, and you would have your installer do the stop on the master carrier right here so that the leading edge overlaps onto the leading edge of a stationary panel. So the left panel is made fuller and it traverses and butts into the right panel, and the dead panel is a stationary drapery panel. You can do this when you have enough room on either side of the door so that you can the door can function, and it also balances it out nicely. Bypasses, key, again, as I said, here's a great example of how, you know, why you have to mount off the trim. Look at the leg on this bracket. They're at least 2 inches. So here you have a C-ring. Now with C-rings look like this, and the weight of the drapery holds the ring vertical. We don't recommend doing shears all that often with C-rings and bypasses because there's not enough weight unless you bead chain or do something to hold the eye vertical. What happens is this C cocks, and then when they're moving it, especially if they're going to function and want to go across that support, they're going to need help to go across that support because this opening either flips down or this piece flips up, and then it gets caught on the leg of the bracket. So keep in mind that the weight of the panel is key in making this function properly. You want to maybe point that out to your customers when you're working with C-rings and bypass. There's fascia traversing systems. There's a decorative look. There's actually a heavy-duty track behind this fascia. So again, you get the beauty of the ball-bearing heavy-duty track and the decorative look. You can put rings on it or you can not put rings on it. Here you can see these are ball-bearing carriers and really heavy-duty master carriers, I think from architectural tracks. So lined, interlined, heavyweight draperies, these systems are perfect for it. And then there's the integrated traverse system. Those are carriers that move through a channel in the center of the rod. And again, many different choices that you have. As you can see, with Orion, the one thing that's nice is they now have heavy-duty track that's in 4 different colors, and that their glides are also in different colors, because there's nothing worse than choosing a dark color and then having a ball-bearing glide that's white, and it kind of shows up because it isn't completely covered when you're put the drapery panel on. Then there's truly custom. It's all about personalizing for the client, and this is what we love as designers, because we love personalization and customization. Plus, it's what I always call that, surprise and delight for the client, and it's the cha-ching factor, like this bird and branch on an arch. But no matter whether you're selling, any of these types of decorative hardware, you really have to know a couple of things when it comes to specifying, what you're trying to accomplish, and that really goes back to knowing your client and listening to what your client really is telling you that she wants. What's the mood or the look or the design intent of the room, all married together with her needs, whether it's light control, privacy, view, etc. Then what are the expectations from you and the client of the performance, particularly if you're working in traversing and functioning decorative hardware? How does it need to operate? Does she want something that just the touch of a hand just pulls, or is she willing to, give it a good yank? If she isn't, maybe motorization is the answer. What's her style? Is it sleek and contemporary or over the top? Is there a theme in the room that you need to marry with your decorative hardware? This, by the way, are the Italian art. These are the new mixed media finials with different woods married with the different finishes in their contemporary line. So again, you get the warmth of the wood with the sleekness and contemporary feel of the Italian art collection. Maybe it's 3D, drapery hardware. For Orion, this is one of their award-winning WCMA awards. They've bent this finial out. So, finials were designed to see the profile. So if you're working in rooms or bays or whatever, where you're actually seeing a finial straight on, you're not seeing the beauty of it because it's not on a profile. And if she spent a lot of money for that finial, you're not meeting her expectations. And also 3D hardware works really nicely in tight spaces, whether you've got dormers or wall-to-wall, etc., because again, you can put a decorative piece on the face and, for the design intent, and still go wall-to-wall. Last but not least, it's always about budget. There's any of the categories we've talked about today can give you a wide variety of options. As I said, not goo, but good, better, and best. It's not about selling cheap. It's about selling functionality and design and creativity and customization. I always like to start when I'm selling decorative hardware at the top and work myself down. It's a lot easier than showing her something and that first that's maybe $1,000, and then when she gets a peek at what she can really do custom and it's going to be $3,000, it's harder to move her up. And then don't sell those nightmares. Again, it's about functionality and maintenance within decorative hardware. We also have accessories that can really be that upsell or really work within a budget to give the client what she wants. Whether it's medallions and tie-back holders and tie-backs, again, another trend that we're seeing is moving away from that stationary panel, thank God, that's just a fluted column of fabric, to at least having some interest in it and in some cases starting to tie things back. And don't forget to always sell Carson holders or hidden tie-back holders. If you're doing tie-backs, build this into your price. This is your standard. This is one of your signatures. I know this isn't decorative hardware, but you need hidden tie-back holders even if you're doing some medallion looks. There's specialty hardware that's out there, whether it's decorative sash rods, no drill screw brackets if you have to mount on the frame. How about this? Don't you love this inside-outside mount? So here I can give her in a cafe a sheer and an over cafe, both one mounted inside, one mounted outside. Or again, beautiful, these are fleur-de-lis medallions from Orion and done beautifully on this kitchen. Cut to measure, miters, bows. Here's a miter, actually from Decorating Den, one of the new winners. Or look at these where they've done straight rods, medallions on the arch, mixed the different medallions to give that whole sort of natural theme. She's got the bird on the pole, and then she's mixed the medallions. But last but not least, it's about also when you're selling decorative hardware and you've on the installation, it's also about building a designer's toolbox, I call it, for on-the-job tweaks and fusses and repairs, if you will. Everything, you know, again, because it's made especially for the window, and taking something that's two-dimensional and having your workroom and your manufacturer turn it into three-dimensional, it's really about customization. So I keep things like certain cords and some paint brushes and different touch-up finishes and stain pens and paint pens to if I have to paint out screws because we had to use a different toggle or a screw that hadn't been painted by the manufacturer. So start building that little odds and ends and toolbox so that you can walk away with a check once it's been installed on the window. And with that truly custom, last but not least, a tip about decorative hardware in making templates. I think we're all familiar with making templates for hard treatments, maybe not so much when we're working in soft and decorative hardware. I always keep a template kit in my car, craft paper or vellum, blue painter's tape, beaded chain, you know, all these pieces, Sharpie. I actually like tailor's chalk to mark for templates, and I'll show you how in a minute. And with the vellum and your steel tape, make sure you know what your manufacturer is requiring. So whether it's medallions for a treatment, whether it's an arched rod, what is Orion or the other drapery hardware manufacturers, what are their requirements? Those you can always find in their catalog, or you can give them a call. Always roll it. Never try to tape pieces together. Don't forget to measure the wall space around the window, not just the window. Digital photos are a godsend to manufacturers. So basically how if I was doing this as a medallion or as an eyebrow rod, I would place painter's tape on the wall first. Then I'd bring up my vellum and I'd place the part around the wall to be templated. Then I'd use a tailor's chalk, and here's my friend Beth Hodges, installer extraordinaire, doing this template. And I'd mark with the tailor's chalk, rub the trim, and trace around the outside edge so that I've got the window. Then I'd go in here and I'd mark my medallion placement for the installer, or I'd mark my rod placement onto that piece of vellum. That's why I like vellum, because you can see through versus craft paper, so I could see where everything visually is going to be specified. And if you are looking for templates, if you send in to install solutions the measurements of your windows, they will build a template for you, and then you can go in and actually mark it for your accessories, rod placement, etc., and send it off to the manufacturer to get looks like this. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to open up the phone lines. Please type in your questions if you have any, and we'll answer them. I want you to, if you have a chance, the next time you're on Facebook, please go ahead and like us on Facebook, and we also have a pinning boards on Pinterest. And I also want to mention that Orion has a Designer's Pride gallery on their website, and if you post any of your finished projects to Designer's Pride, there's a 10% off coupon for your next order. And also, don't forget to visit Orion's website to find out who their distributor is near you, there's a distributors tab up on the home page where you get an by state listing of the hardware manufacturer distributors that are out there. So are there any questions? Give you a minute. Hope you enjoyed today's broadcast. Doesn't look like I have anything coming in. What I am going to do is open it up to our drawing. Oh, Mary had a question. Can I go over the dead panel treatment? Sure. Let me go back to that. Flipping through this, through that. Where was I? There we go. All right. So to get a pair of draperies, what I would do is determine my, first of all, I've got to make sure that the area that I want to cover, that I have enough room to come over onto either side to determine that rod face width or that bracket to bracket. And so if I want, and I wanted it functioning, I would then order one rod, one decorative rod. I would order a panel that was a one-way draw that basically went from whatever this measurement is, from the base of the finial to the leading edge of the other panel. So again, you need to know what that stack is going to be from base of finial to the leading edge. And I usually add 2 or 3 inches for ease because of the overlaps. And I also might make a larger overlap, like a 4.5 inches, if you will. And then, so I would order this as a panel, because typically the bracket to bracket on the left panel here is going to be larger than on the right panel here. So I'd order 2 panels, and they would order this as a one-way draw traversing rod. You would make sure that you had the correct number of rings on it, and so it would traverse this way. And what your installer would do is he basically uses a dead stop, and he puts a dead stop right here before that second ring, Mary. And so then this panel is stationary, and this one actually functions. Does that make sense to you? Let me see if I see. I got more questions here. There will not be a hard copy of the presentation, Sandra, but there is a recording, and in Thursday or Friday of this week, you'll get a confirmation email thanking you for attending, and there will be a link to the recording, and there also will be a link probably on the homepage somewhere. Tiffany, will we be putting it on the homepage of Orion?
Yes.
Okay, great. Phone number of Minutes Matter. Victoria, I'll send that to you. Don't know it offhand and don't know where it is on my slides. It's called Studio or minutesmatter.com. You can find their forms online. Is there a set formula for appropriate fullness on traversing rods? I have a limited stack back issue between windows, so I'm looking closely at fabric weight right now. Perfect. Karna, I will send you, there's a formula to figure fabric weight based on how many yards of fabric you're using. If you don't already have that, just type it in and I'll definitely figure that for you. There really isn't a set formula for appropriate formulas. Typically, a custom drapery is considered a minimum of 2.5 to 1 fullness. Your stack back is really going to be more, you're going to be more concerned about the size of your ring and the size of your pleat that you're using, Karna. Ripple folds take less stack than pleated draperies as a rule of thumb. What I would do is Google a stack back chart if you don't already have one, and work backwards. So find what on the chart, find the amount of space. You said you have a limited amount of space. Find the amount of space you have that you can work with, and then work backwards, and it'll tell you what kind of stack back you have to have. You won't be able, Cynthia, to download my slides, but you'll be able to watch the recording at your convenience. How many times can you submit to Designer's Pride? as many times as you'd like, Monica. We love your work. Post it, post it. Any other questions? Okay, let's get to the good stuff. Let me go right back to the drawing real quick. So I think the first thing we're going to draw for is what, Ella or Tiffany, the designer's bag?
Yes, designer's bag.
Okay, so this is the designer's bag. Do you know what's in it again? Okay, 6 finial samples, the bag, and then all the catalogs and brochures and price points, which is really nice to sell from because typically we're having to sell from 4 color shots. It's really nice to have finished samples and have samples. So who's the winner, Ella?
The winner is April Viola.
Congratulations, April. And please type into the question box your email address, April, so that we can get in touch with you and get this designer's bag sent out to you to the address, to the ship-to address of your choice. Okay, and one of my favorite things is the new, how is the winner determined? Good question, Rose. Actually, I didn't have anything to do with it. Ella did a random number drawing based on the attendees that were on today's webinar. So it was done, it was all kosher. So I just got my new binder and I love it. So this is a new binder and it's full of all the finished samples, as you can see, both wood and iron chips, and they're all marked. And it's in a binder and they're all in plastic sheath cases, so it's really, again, nice to work from to show a client what the finish is going to look like in the room versus resolution picture. And Ella, who's the winner of the binder?
The binder winner is Monica Hancock.
Monica! Congratulations. Please send me your email through the question box so that we can, and your ship to address so we know how to ship to you. That would be really helpful. And Anne had a really great question. How much does the binder run? It's a new binder. Ella, Tiffany, can you chime in? How much does it cost?
The new binder is $70.
Okay. And can they get it through you or their distributor?
Both.
Okay, awesome, awesome. You know what, that's one job worth of, because it's every finish. How many finishes are in there? You guys know? There has to be about 100 finishes, right?
Tiffany, do you know how many colors are in there?
It's 35 iron art, 6 Italian, and 11 wood.
And you have Italian in there, right?
Yes.
Okay, so about 65 finishes, right? And got another question. Oh, thanks for the nice comment, Rosa. Dana, is your catalog available in PDF version online, Tiffany?
It is through our customer login. All of our printed materials are available in PDF.
Okay. So if you're a customer, Dana, you can log in and see all that information along with your pricing. If you're not, I believe there is a link on the website to open an account, and it's free to open an account, correct?
Correct.
I know. Great question, Dana. Is it available as an app?
Not yet. We're going to be working on it.
That's what I heard. I know. I'm excited about that. Well, you know what? How I would do that, Dana, is just what you could do is download it into your Dropbox and keep it in your Dropbox as a PDF, or where I keep it is in my iBooks on my iPad as a PDF versus having it as a separate app. Oh, thanks, Monica. Monica said, just a reminder to all of you that if you are a WCAA member, you get an additional 5% off on discount on all your Orion offers. Thanks so much. Any other questions before we leave? And Karen, sorry that you didn't get to see the whole webinar. Yes, it will be available. A recording will be available online, and we'll be sending you the link out by the end of the week. Well, guys, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to the next one. We're going to be doing a series of these webinars, and I believe next one is after Memorial Day, the 29th of May. So thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.